This is Cricut Design Space. And today I want to talk to you about shapes. And then we're going to move into text. Under shapes, when I click on this button, you can see there are several free shapes that we can use. There are also, if you pay for Cricut Access, these are additional shapes that you would get for free. I personally do not pay for Access. I get a lot of my designs, my fonts, my images free from other resources. And when we get into talking about SVG files, I will show you that information more in depth. But you can do a lot with the free shapes. I do a lot with making cards. So let me select the square and insert that. I am going to take all of this and just hide it. You can hide anything that is on your screen by clicking this little eyeball over here on our layers panel. That turns it off. It's now hidden. It's still there if we want it, but the Cricut is not going to cut it because it's hidden. This is a great way if you're working on things and you just want to cut one piece of it or one portion of the project, you can turn off things. Okay, here's our shape. Now, last week we were looking at images, and I want to show you that a lot of things with images and shapes are very similar. We have the 4 icons on the outside. This one is for deleting. This one is for rotating. You can also go up here and say, I want this at a 45-degree angle and rotate it that way. So very similar to what we did before. Right now, this is a square. So when I go like this, you can see that the width and the height stay proportional to make it a square. So if I clicked this unlock button, I could then stretch that square to make it a rectangle. I can even go up here and type in that I want it to be 8 inches wide and let's say 4 inches tall. Over here, the operation is set for basic cut. We could change that to some of the different operations we talked about last week. We can also change the color by using this little square here. I'm just going to change it to pink because I like pink. If you follow me at all, you'll learn that I use a lot of pink in my examples and Disney images because those are the things I gravitate to. So if we're making a card, for example, the basic shape of a card is a rectangle with a fold in the center of it. If we go into shapes, there's this line right here that's a score line. I can take this score line and make the height of it 4 inches high, which is the same as the height of my card. Now, a lot of people will take this and try to center it in there, but Cricut Design Space has a nifty little tool called Align. I can take this and say align that score line to the very center of my card. It's perfectly aligned in the center. So then the next thing I'm going to do is click attach. That holds that placement in position. So now watch this. If I resize that card, that fold line still stays centered. Even if I unlock this and change it to a really big card. See how it still kept that all centered. So that's the nice thing about using attach. I use attach all the time for my score lines, for my projects. So then I'm just using the back arrow to get back to a smaller size card. Oops, there we go. Okay. So then if we wanted to, we could just add, let's say, a heart. This is just showing you how to make a very simple, very basic card. I'm actually doing a card making series on my site if you're interested in learning more about making cards. But there's a really simple card that you could make. So that just shows you can do some things with just your basic shapes. Another thing I do with my basic shapes is make frames. I do a lot of scrapbooking, and to kind of accent a picture, I'll sometimes put a frame around it. So if I did this 4-inch square, and then I right click on the image to duplicate it, and let's make the inner square 3.5. Now, if I take those and make sure that they're aligned in the centers, I can then use slice. Slice will cut one thing from another. So what it's doing here is slicing the little square out of the big square. So now I made this little frame. Yeah, if I wanted to, I could put that little frame on the card. Look at that. We're building a card. So again, showing you how you can just look at something in its basic form and then build from there. Okay. Any questions about using shapes? Okay, then I'm going to go on to text. I'm just going to group this all together. Slide it over here. So right here is our text button in Cricut Design Space. If I click on that, the word text comes up. You just start typing, Easter, okay? So if I wanted to make an Easter card, that's all I would have to do is type in the text right here. It's now going to cut this. Just like with images and shapes, I can delete it here, rotate it here, or with the rotate button up here. I can resize it and keep it proportional, or I can unlock it and then I can stretch my letters. With some fonts, this looks kind of cool. With other fonts, it looks kind of wacky. So play around with things. There are other things that you can do. Well, you can change the color, just like you could with your shapes and your images. You can curve your text. This is kind of cool. If I click on the word text, and right up here, there's a button that says curve on the top. This is only available on the computer version. So if you're working on the iPad or on your phone, you won't have the curve function. But now I could curve that text. Oh, I just had a cute idea. If you had a little Easter egg, you could kind of curve this around the top of the egg. Wouldn't that be cute? Okay, so then if you wanted to curve the other way, so it curved up like a smiley face, you just slide this little dial that way. Okay, I am going to set that back to 0 because I don't want to curve for the rest of my demo. And that's a nice thing too. If you decide, nope, I don't want it, you can either set this back to 0 or just use your undo button to go backwards. So Cricut Design Space has some fonts in it already. You can also go to places like dafont.com, DAFONT.com, to install other fonts. If you're getting fonts from other resources outside of Cricut Design Space, you're going to download those fonts and install them to your computer. You don't upload them to Design Space. This is a huge thing that a lot of people get really confused. They're like, how do I upload it to Design Space? You don't. You install it to your computer. You install it to your iPad. So if you want that same font and you want it available when you switch between computer and iPad, you're going to have to install it on your computer and install it on your iPad. and your phone or what other devices you're using.
Shawn, what was the name of that again? Could you spell that?
Dafont, DAFont.com. There's other places to get free fonts, but Dafont is my go-to. I mean, if you want to find a font and like end up going down a rabbit hole of so many fonts, and all of a sudden you're like 2 hours later, I have 52 new fonts that I have to install. Like, you can get lost on there going, "Ooh, that's pretty. Ooh, that's pretty." But just know you have to install them to your device. On my iPad and on my phone, I use the iFont app to install. I'm sorry, I don't have an Android, so I can't tell you what's the best way to install, but go on Google and type in install font on Android. I'm sure there's some information out there. On my computer here, I'm able to right click on the font file and a little button comes up that says install. So it's going to be different for every operating system. On my YouTube channel, I do show you how I do it. But again, that's if you have the same setup as me, Windows operating system. So if you have something different, like a Mac, you could Google install font on Mac to find the best way. Okay. That one piece right there, if you get nothing else from this session today, will save you so much time, because I answer that one all the time of how do I download a font and get it in Design Space. So now if you want to change your font, if we click on the word, you'll see this secondary panel came up. And right here it says font. So this is telling me the current font is Cricut Sans. So if I click on that, that opens up a whole new list. These are all the fonts that are either in Cricut Design Space or that I have downloaded and installed on my computer. Let me show you one of these fonts. This is one I got from Dafont. I'm not sure if you can see this.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. It's called a dingbat font. And what a dingbat font is instead of a letter, it inserts an image as that letter. So you can search for dingbat fonts, and if there's a different, theme that you like, you could end up with all these pictures that you can now cut just by installing a font. I mean, how amazing is that? So now if I change this to, let's just change that to a different font. I use the dingbat fonts a lot because then you don't have to go find, oh, here's another one, Disney Family. That is not a Disney character. Sorry. Okay, so let's put it back on an actual true font. There we go. Oh, that's kind of cute. So when we click on the font, you're going to see some of them have a little A right here. That means that it is included in Cricut Access. So if you're paying for Cricut Access, you can use that font. I do not pay for Cricut Access. So if I use this font, it's going to cost me $4.99, just even if I'm only cutting the word Easter out of that font. They charge you for the whole font. Once I pay for it, it's mine and I can use it all the time. So up on the top where it says fonts, you'll see up here it says all fonts. Here it says system fonts. So now it's only showing me the fonts I've downloaded and installed on my computer. Now if I click on Cricut, it's only showing me the Cricut fonts. So now you can see there's a lot of price tags attached. If you knew the name of the font, for example, there's one called I Love Glitter. that is really popular around Mother's Day because it has these cute little swirly things in it. You can add these little swirls or glyphs to the end with a little heart on it. And let's see if I remember the right character. Nope. There's one of them. There we go. There's the one with the heart. So you can add things like that. To get this one with the heart, I did a dash line. And on font, where you get this I love glitter font, it tells you there, like, do an underscore to get this kind of swirl, do a dash to get this kind of swirl. So people really love using this one at Mother's Day. I see people type up children's names and then put this little heart swish in between the names on a display piece for grandma. Super cute. So if you know the name of the font and you've installed it to your device, you can type it in that way. Okay. Right here is a newer feature in Design Space where they automatically check this, so you're only showing kerned fonts. A kerned font is one that when you type it up, the letters are going to connect like this. Basically, think of your script type fonts. But what if you don't want to use a script type font? Then I would uncheck this because then you're able to see all of your fonts. Okay. I am going to go back here. Now within fonts, there are different styles. This one right here is a single layer cutting font. I can tell that multiple places. When I click on the font, up here, the operation says basic cut. If I look on the right, on my layers panel, right here next to the big E for the preview, it says basic cut. And it's just, the text is all on one line. I'm going to duplicate that so I can show you the difference between a single layer and a multi-layer. So if I go in my filters, I've used these filters all the time because there are so many fonts. I forget which ones are my free ones and which ones are the paid for ones. So I will always come in here and filter to my fonts because I'm always just seeing the ones available to me. There's nothing worse than working on a project or a scrapbook layout and you get it perfect and then you go, oh, I don't want to pay $5 just for that one font. And then no other font looks right to you. So that's my little tip there, is filter to your fonts when you're browsing. So there's also multi-layer and single layer fonts. I already showed you the single layer with this one that we're looking at. Let's look at the multi-layer fonts. I'm going to pick this one. And let Design Space catch up to me. Okay. So right now, it looks like it's only cutting one color. But let's look over here at the layers panel. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 different layers. But they're not showing up because, see the little eyeball? That's closed off on some of them. So if I turn that on, see how that added another piece? And I could do this. This is adding an offset. So long time ago, a little Cricut history, Cricut only made the single layer fonts and the multi-layer fonts. If you wanted an offset to your font, you had to use a multi-layer font. Now, Cricut has an offset tool. So if you wanted to add an offset to a single layer font, you could, in essence, make a multi-layer font. And I can show you that too. Okay, so this green is actually the same as that yellow. Oh, no, it's not. It's a little bit different. There we go. So there's with all 4 layers turned on. So you can see this multi-layer font really expands what you could do. You could, turn off this blue piece and just do up layers like that. You could turn off this green piece and just do something more simple like that. It allows you to become more creative with your design because they already built in those layers for you. And with this, because each color is on its own layer, when you hit make it goes to the cutting mat. The Cricut's gonna sort things out so that all of the teal blue are on one cutting mat and all the yellow is on another cutting mat. So it does it for you. Okay. Any questions on a multi-layer font? Good. Okay. So now the last style, let me zoom out because I am in there really tight. I am going to duplicate this one. I use duplicate a lot. It's basically doing copy and paste all in one move. There is a copy and then a paste. But to me, it's like, well, if I'm going to copy and paste and duplicate does it all, boom, at once, why not? Okay. So the last font style is a writing style font. This would be the type of font you would want to use with your pens. So again, I'm going to go up to fonts. I'm going to use my filter and say, show me my fonts that are writing style. And there's one that I really like, this one. It's called Santa's Workshop, but I actually use it year round. So do you see how this is a very thin font? That is because this one is going to be drawn with your Cricut pens. Now, if you forget, did somebody say something?
Yeah.
Okay. If you forget, if you have it set on a writing style font or a cutting font, click on the font. Right here under style, it says writing. Also over here on your layers panel, it says pen right there. So it's telling you that you're going to write this with the pen. I have seen a lot of people that will take a single layer font, like this first one we looked at, and just go over here to operation and change it from cut to draw with the pen. And they'll get very frustrated and say, well, it's going to draw it, but it's doing these hollowed out letters. That is because your Cricut blade and your Cricut pen are going to follow the same path. So since you started with a cutting style font and changed it to be drawn with a pen, it's still going to draw that outline because it's following the same path. If you wanted to write like, or print like you would if you were using an actual pen, you would want to use a writing style font because that is a single pen stroke instead of the double thickness. Now, as crafters, we hate being told you can't do that. So when Cricut, allowed us to change from cutting to drawing, and we all went, but I wanted to color that in, and they went, oh, you can't do that. We figured out a way. If you download a Hatchfield SVG, you can color this in, and let me show you what that would look like. I'm going to change it back to cut. And I've already uploaded a Hatchfield SVG that I created. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Oh, I thought I had it in here. I guess not. Okay, let's go back to upload again. If I upload the Hatchfield. Now I gotta remember where I saved it. One moment, please. Hatch lines. Okay, it looks black right there, right? But if I'm, oops, sorry, I gotta move my little window with all of your lovely faces in it. There we go. It looks black. But when I add this to the canvas, now you can start to see, especially if I zoom in, it's really made up of a whole bunch of little lines right next to each other. So when I put this inside that cutting style one, I can change this hatch to be drawn, and I'm telling the pen to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth along these lines. So how would I do that? Oops, I would not zoom in. Sometimes talking and crafting don't go together. Okay, so let's make this a different color than black so we can see the magic happen. Hello. Okay. So if I have that hatch font, hatch fill in there and the word Easter, I select everything and then go slice. Slice is going to cut the hatch fill into the shape of the cutting word Easter. So now if I took this and changed that to be drawn with the pen, I'm telling the pen to go back and forth on those lines. So in essence, I'm coloring in the letters. So your choices for colored in letters are either pick a writing style font, it's a single pen stroke, or use a hatch fill. Okay, I really think Cricut should make a hatch fill that they put in their free images, because that would be really nice. But until then, us crafters find the workaround. So these are your three basic styles: a single layer font, a multi-layer font, and a writing style font. So I say when you're working with fonts, think about the look you want before you pick your font. Because again, you don't want to spend all this time designing something and they go, oh, I really wanted that to be drawn and filled in, and like now I have to do all these extra steps where I could have just picked a writing font and it would have been drawn just fine. The other thing, now that Cricut Design Space has added an offset feature, I could take this multi-layered font and change it, or I'm sorry, I could take this single layer font and add an offset to make it a multi-layer font. So I would just click the offset button. And I can slide that around until it's a size I like. Looks really big. Well, now we went too tiny. There we go, apply. So the difference between using an offset on a font, oh, you know what, I could have done that. Between using an offset and using a multi-layer font. So the offset is literally just going to trace the outline of your layers exactly as they are. The multi-layer font, you can see sometimes you get that extra layer that's kind of a dropped shadow. Like this green is a dropped shadow versus a perfect outline. So this is just because the Cricut designers can do some more fancy stuff than we can do with just our basic tools here. Okay. Any questions about how to find the font, how to find your free fonts, installing fonts, single layer, multi-layer, or writing style fonts? It's a lot of info, I know.
Marie has a question.
Okay.
So Shawn, I'm fascinated. I love it. I mean, because I own my Cricut. I've used it to death. In fact, I mean, I'm amazed that it's still living with all the use I've done. But I learn something every time I'm here. But I was wondering, do you have a list somewhere like on your site? I haven't looked, that carefully yet. But do you have a list of your like favorites for like writing? I mean, you got a font and it's like there are thousands and thousands.
You could go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So I feel like fonts are a very personal thing. There are some fonts that people are like, oh my God, I love it. And I look at them like, why? Like, it's a thing. But fonts do matter, because if you typed up I will always love you in a very fancy font, it looks gorgeous. But if you do it in one of those drippy paint ones, it looks like a creepy serial killer. So font styles are important. I do have a list on my site that's called the best fonts for crafting. And by best, it's best and most popular. I list things like I love glitter, because I feel like every Mother's Day, people are asking, what's that font where you put the cute little hearts between the names? And before I had even made a shirt or a project using that font, I was like, I love glitter. Like, you just know, because you hear people ask it so many times. The other font that gets asked about a lot is this font called Samantha. And it's sold by Creative Fabrica, who I'm an affiliate with. So if you're on my site and in my best fonts thing, it'll have a link to it. So thank you for clicking that link, because then I get a little credit. But Samantha is one of those ones that has the really cool flourishes that you can add to the front and the end of words. Just makes them look fancier. And there's all kinds of fun swirls where you can have it swirl up and around. And people have done some really gorgeous things with that. And it's really popular. And every once in a while, Creative Fabrica will have it on sale. And I usually announce that in my group. I think it was back at Thanksgiving last time that they had it on sale. So that is a font that must be purchased. I think it's $9. Don't quote me on that. But I personally do a lot of free fonts, just because I'm thrifty. I mean, it's the honest truth. Unless I really, really love it. And there was one time I had a customer that wanted me to make something, and they're like, no, it has to be this font. I'm like, well, then you're paying for it, because I wouldn't be buying it if it wasn't for your project. So yeah, I do have my best fonts. And then also, if you go on my site and search free fonts, I will show you a list of the Cricut free fonts. And then that's where I tell you how to go to places like DaFont and install other fonts for free. I really think people should, find the ones you like. Like for writing fonts, I really like this one, the Santa's Workshop. Did I answer your question? Okay. Somebody else has their hand up, but I cannot tell the name.
It says KMT.
Yeah, Ken.
I know it's short for something.
Hi,
Great.
this is Ken. I like a question about stenciling, about punch outs. Is there particular fonts that you have a list that perhaps keep the center part stay intact when you?
Yes. Well, I don't have a list, but this is actually something that I want to make a video on. You're not going to see me on screen because I'm going to sit down for this. And I'm short, so you're just going to see my floating head. So you would have to use a stencil font, because if you cut this out and try to make this into a stencil, that center part of the R and the center of the A would cut out. But there's a trick that you reminded me I need to do a video on this. I could turn this into a stencil font. So first, what I would have to do is click on this and ungroup this. Now this is allowing me to use each letter individually instead of as a grouping. Okay, you can see over here on the layers panel, it separated them to each letter. So now what I would do is insert a shape. And I'm just going to use a rectangle. And if I unlock that and make it a little skinny piece like this, I could set that right there on the R. Okay, so now if I select the R and that little piece, and now I have to move where you guys are, there we go. And then I hit slice. Basically what I'm doing is cutting that line through the R. And now when I pull away these pieces, see how I turned that R into a stencil shape now, because now if I use this, everything's connected. There's no center piece that's separate. So really you can start to turn any font into a stencil font. You know, I could do that here and do the same thing for the A. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. So there are specific stencil fonts. If you go on dafont.com, I feel like I should be a paid advertising for DaFont today, but they have a whole category called Stencil. But again, fonts are very personal. And if you don't find one that you love there, that's how you could turn almost any font into a stencil font. I do need to do a full video on that process and do a project with it. So there, you guys just learned something I don't even have out there anywhere yet. Any other questions before yeah, Betty. You're muted, Betty. Oh, you're muted. We got to unmute you.
Okay, now I think I'm on. I have
Yep.
downloaded a lot of fonts using DaFont. And when I get ready to design something, I use a website called Wordmark. And it allows me to type in whatever phrase I want, and it shows me every font that's on my computer that's downloaded. However, sometimes a few of those fonts show up in my computer, but when I go to print my thing on Cricut, that font is not available. Why does Cricut sometimes not show the fonts that are in my computer?
Well, whenever I install a new font, I always close Design Space and then reopen it to make sure everything is synced up. You can
Yeah.
also go up here to go to view and go force reload.
Okay, well, some of these I've reloaded, you know, or gone to several times and they still don't show up, and I just wondered why. Because some of them are fonts, I'd really like to use them.
So it could be just a Cricut glitch.
Okay, I'll try the reload. I didn't know
Yeah.
about that.
I always close and then reopen, and then your font is going to be under system fonts because
Okay.
it's one you've downloaded.
Okay, good.
And forced reload are usually, you know, what make it appear, because that's the other biggest question I get is like, oh, I did the whole install to my computer, it's still not there. Oh, I know the other one to do. Let me show you. So if we go here to fonts, check this. If
Okay,
your only current fonts is checked,
okay.
it might be filtering. And this is why I hate this button being automatically checked by Cricut. It's because now if I type in the name of a font and it's not a current font, it's not going to show up. So if you've restarted, done a free forced reload, then go in here and check that only current fonts is unchecked, and then it should be in your system fonts.
Okay, good. I didn't know about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I hate when they default to things that I'm like, but that's not what I wanted it to default to. I wish they had somewhere in the settings where we could pick. Yes, always default to that. No, don't default to that. That's my 2 cents for Cricut. That's a different day. Let's see if we can get our voices heard. So then the only other thing I was going to go over today was kind of other ways you could use fonts, unless you have more questions. Let's change this to a regular font. So some fonts, like this one, have multiple options. You can go under style and you can get a regular font. You can get a bold font. And that's all going to depend on the specific font, what's available. You can play around with that to see what's there. You can, let's find a cursive font. One moment, please. Okay, that'll work. It's not my favorite font. There are some fonts that I really hate, that like I'll like one letter and then there's a different letter that I'm like, oh, I don't like the way that I goes. I have actually been known to mix and match my fonts to create a whole new word. It allows me to be more creative. So right now, the Cricut's going to cut these all separate like this. But if I wanted it to cut it so that they're connecting, I can go up here to my letter spacing and reduce the spacing between them so they come together. And now they look connected, correct? So what I would do now, I'm going to change the color to see if we can see this better. Yep, okay. So what I want you to do is look right here between the S and the H, between the H and the O and the W. You see where the letters basically overlap? There's those cut lines. So if I want this to cut as all one word, what I would do is click the weld button, because weld will join anything that is touching or overlapping. Okay, so this actually brought up a really good example. It filled in my O. That's because something was overlapping too far and going into the center of that O. So here's how I resolve that. I will normally ungroup my letters, and let's just select the W and the O and weld those. Okay, those work good. Let's do the S and the H and weld. Okay, so now that pulled the H on top, I can see it's probably this little part of the H is inside the O too much. So I'm going to scooch it this way. And then because I want to make sure everything's still straight on the bottom, I'm going to pick everything and say align the bottoms. And then weld that. There we go. So if you ever weld a whole word and one of your centers fills in on a script font like this, there's probably a tail from one of the other letters sticking into that center. I have found ungrouping and then doing it in sections so you can kind of look at where that overlap might be really helps. Any questions about that? See, so I'm like solving some of the most common asked problems here for you too at the same time. By the time this is done, you guys are going to be able to put together the top 10 Cricut issues and how to resolve them. And then I could add an offset to this. There we go. I can change the color of the offset. So there's really a lot of stuff you can do just with fonts. I use stuff like this I do a lot of scrapbooking and card making. And sometimes if you're doing lettering on those things, it's nice to have that second color to kind of make things pop. So then this looks really nice on top. And okay, just look at my list to see what other things I was going to show you. We have 9 minutes left. I want to make sure nobody has any questions on fonts.
No, so far we don't just yet. So.
Okay, good. So then another thing you can do, just using shapes and fonts, a lot of people like to make monogrammed things. So you could do this and put my S for Shawn in there. And then I can center those on top of each other and then use slice. Slice allows you to cut one thing from another. So now I have a little heart with an S cut out of it. This would be really cute. I have a lot of nieces and nephews, so I make custom things for them. And if I do like water bottles for the summer, I could do little designs with, you know, the first initial. So then nobody's cup gets hijacked by a sibling because everybody's got their own color and their own initials in them. So that's always a nice thing to kind of do. Oh, if I did, there's another thing we can do with text. So if we want these to be stacked, I can hit the return key between them and now they're stacked on top of each other. And I don't like that font for this, so let's find a different font. Okay, so if I was doing this and I wanted it all to be centered, I could use this alignment tool and say center those letters. And it's also taking the space in there. So now I'm going to take that space out. There we go. Just hit return. So now the letters are all centered. Or I could say align them to the left. If I wanted this to have less space in between the letters, I can use the line spacing. Now remember before we used the letter spacing to bring the letters closer together. The line spacing are going to bring the lines of text closer together. Now, what if I wanted to make each line of text a different color? I could type this up 3 times and make each one a different color, or I can use this advanced button here and say ungroup to lines. And now it just made each one of those their own separate line. So now I can make each line a separate color. So just lots of different ways that you can play with that and use your text to, you know, add some more interest and excitement to your designs.